Guys, how you guys doing? This is Curtis from the FXBG Turks here with the video that I promised you guys earlier in our first episode of the podcast. Basically what this is, it's a start of a video series designed to help newer players get into the game competitively. So if you're looking to make that competitive jump and kind of take your game to the next level, this is what this series is meant to do. If you're a brand new player, there are plenty of resources out there to kind of teach you how to play the game, and they're definitely great. Give all those channels a view and learn as much as you can. But I haven't really seen too many videos discussing the competitive side to it, so this is what this is designed to do. Now the things that we're going to talk about down the line will be like how the stack works, which is something that a lot of players seem to have a difficulty getting a grasp of, especially like experienced players too. Another thing that we'll be talking about is what makes a good hand, how to, what hands to keep, as well as trying to figure out what the other deck is doing strategy-wise and why people play certain cards. But for today's video is going to be more about deciding what to play and how to build your deck in a competitive meta, so to speak. So let's go ahead and pretty much get this started. So on the Facebook page, I see a lot of people posting questions about whether they should play like a mono deck or a dual color deck or even a tricolor deck. There are different advantages to each of those styles, and we'll take a look at each one. We're not going to go too much into the card choices just because that's going to be for the second half of this video. But let's go ahead and take a look at an example here. So this is a build that Adam Lane piloted for his local qualifier win. Congratulations to him, and shout out to the RVA Returners. He's a founding member of that content channel. So if you want more information about the game and want to listen to more things, definitely give him a check, and you'll be able to learn a lot. But this kind of deck right here, it's one color, so it's really easy to play from a beginner standpoint. You don't have to worry about being locked out of certain colors, and even though there's a dark card there, if you don't know dark or light cards, you can pitch any color for them, so it doesn't really matter so much. So it's technically a monocolor deck that we call it. But definitely the advantage of this is much simpler to pilot. The deck itself is not easy, I'm not saying that, but you don't have to think so much about resources in this kind of situation. Now the next step up would be a dual color deck. This is just something that I threw up a while ago, so if you want to pick it up and play it, you can definitely go ahead and do that. I haven't tested this at all, so it's probably really bad. So don't think that this is going to break the meta or anything like that. But here, as you do see, there are different colors, and that has a potential to be a little bit more difficult, because if you pitch the wrong card, you might lock yourself out of a different option next turn, which is definitely something to look out for. Now, the reason why you play dual color decks is not to make it more hard on yourself. What you're basically doing is you're adding to the strengths of one color, or you are making up for the weaknesses of that color. So an example would be like, let's say, ice. Ice by itself, very strong, and if you know anything about the meta, mono ice is pretty much making a lot of people complain. It's pretty strong, really consistent. However, it has terrible, terrible defense. So what you can do to make up for that weakness is you can add in earth to it, which definitely a lot of people are doing, and I'm pretty sure that Okamoto won one of the Crystal Cups with that ice earth deck, just because it's very strong, has a lot of defensive options, as well as the same things that ice is known for. An example to that to add to it would be like ice fire. So this is an example of where you're taking two colors to complement the strength of it, not to make up for the weakness. So ice itself, very strong. What they basically do is they make you discard a lot, and a lot of those cards also freeze too. Now if you're just playing ice and you play, like, let's say a Genesis, you dull and freeze their card, and if you hit them, they discard a card. Now by itself it's good, but it's not that fast, so they have one turn to react to that card. Now you can make up for that and add to that strength by playing fire, which you can give it haste and swing, and then from there you get the dull freezing effect, and then also you get the card out their hand, and you give them a point of damage. So that's kind of an example there of how one color can add to that strength. Now the next thing would be like a tricolor deck. And this is the deck I played at Crystal Cup, Kansas, where I got top 16. And something that me and Adam Lane kind of put together and worked on. But basically, this kind of deck is very hard to play, just because you kind of have to be very careful about your resources, because if you make one mistake, you're going to be locked out of playing any card for like a couple turns, and that could just be a disaster for you. Now, the reason why you play this deck is because you have a lot of different options. There's basically something that you can do each turn for any kind of card that they play, but you have to pilot it correctly. I definitely don't recommend this kind of deck for any beginner unless you're very experienced in another card game already. So like if you come from a Magic background or something along that nature, this kind of deck might be something up to your speed. This is for the previous format though, so you probably don't want to copy this card for card. You probably want to update it with a new set, but this is an example of what a tricolor deck would look like. So the main question that most people have is like, what color is the easiest to play? Now, there really isn't any color that's the easiest per se, but usually when new people get into the game, they usually start with mono fire or mono earth, just because it's a little bit more straightforward, but not necessarily to say it's easy, but that's just usually what new players tend to gravitate to. So if you're brand new and you want to play competitively, I'd probably go with mono earth, just because mono fire right now hasn't shown too many results in competitive play. It tops occasionally, but you don't really see it too often. But usually if you want to play into this game, what I would recommend is, instead of looking at what's easiest, think about your budget. If you want to be competitive and you want to play the game, watch out for ice and watch out for lightning. Usually those have the most expensive cards. Earth has expensive cards too, but I would say in my experience, probably ice and lightning would be more expensive. But if that doesn't matter for you, then go ahead, pick any color you pretty much want, and just go ahead and pick up and play the game. But right now what we're going to do is kind of talk about what each color does and what their strengths are and what kind of cards you'll see. We're not going to go into like every single card in the game, because that kind of take too long, and that's going to be the next video, which will kind of tell you like a couple cards to watch out for each type of card, like forwards, backups, summons, monsters, things like that. But we'll start with Earth. Basically what Earth is known for is big monsters, a lot of combat tricks, and protection. And like this card here, Guy, they usually have Brave, or they have cards that give them Brave. And what that means is when they attack, they don't get dulled, so you can actually block with them next turn without having to worry. And when I mean combat tricks, there's a lot of cards that kind of like boost your power unexpectedly, or make it so they can't die during combat, so that way you can kind of block and kill their guy, but you keep yours. But that's pretty much what Earth is pretty much known for. Now for Fire, it's kind of the same thing as Earth. They do have a lot of big monsters, and they also have a lot of cards that deal damage to forwards. And they also have cards that make it so you can't block. But that's pretty much it for Fire. That's why you usually don't see them too much in competitive play, just because they are kind of one-dimensional. They kind of just do one thing. So if you have a counter to it, they kind of just lose. But a lot of cards in Fire usually have haste, so that means when you play it, you can just attack as soon as possible, or they have a lot of cards that give haste, like when I talk about Ice Fire, giving the ice cards haste and things like that. Lightning would be the next color that we could talk about. A lot of those cards also have haste as well. However, they do mostly ping damage, and what I mean by ping damage is they do damage in increments. So one card will do like 6,000 and another card will do 3,000, and when you combo that together, it'll be 9,000, which usually will kill a forward that you're trying to kill. Now the downside of Lightning is they usually have weaker cards. Their forwards aren't that strong, but it kind of makes up for all the combo damage that they do. Another good thing about Lightning is they have a lot of cards that just outright break a card. So that way you don't even have to worry about health or doing ping damage, you just straight up kill it. For Ice, They have a lot of things that they do as well. The main one that you probably heard about already is discard. A lot of their cards pretty much make it so that you can't play cards, which is really annoying, especially with a lot of the Turbo Ice builds that are out right now. Basically, they can make you pitch 3 cards in one turn at the start of the turn, so you're basically starting with 4 cards, and it makes it really hard to, like, play the game. It's definitely beatable. I've definitely done it in the past, and that's how I got qualified for nationals, beating a Turbo Ice deck. But it is very annoying, and down the line we'll kind of teach you like how to get around that, or what kind of cards to look out for, and find out what type of ice deck you're playing. But other than discard, they also have a lot of cards that freeze and dull cards, so that way they can get past your blockers, and then cards like this, Genesis here, they can hit you directly to make you discard that card. That's pretty much what ice does overall. Now for water, this is a slower color. They try to build backups as soon as possible, and that way they play the late game. But most of their cards bounce forwards back to hand, or they bounce like monsters back to hand. So it's kind of like a tempo kind of color. Another thing that they do is they reduce power a lot, so they will make your forwards, weaker, so that way they can't block effectively. And also they have heavy draw, so water probably draws the most in this game, and we'll talk about the cards that enable you to do that. And the last color that we'll talk about is wind. You don't really see this color played too much either, like fire, and the reason for that is for the longest time, fire and wind have kind of been support elements. They don't really have too many things going for them, but right now, what wind does is a lot of ping damage, so like that incremental damage to kill forwards, and they have a lot of reactivation. So that what that means is you're able to play a lot of free cards. So like you'll play a backup which reactivates your backups, and that way you can play more cards the same turn. Usually you would just play one card and just be done. They also have a lot of cards that don't let you block. So like a card like Paul can't be blocked by anything that's above 3 cost. So a lot of cards are like that, but they're really weak. So that's a drawback to it. And they also have a lot of mill for this color too. So if they ever hit you, or if they play a certain card, you'll get rid of the top card of your deck. And that's kind of one of the strategies that wind does. Not to say that wind's bad. Mono Wind actually won a major tournament in Australia. So it kind of shows you that anything can be played in this game. You just kind of have to know exactly what you're doing. And that's what we're going to talk about now, how to build your deck. Alright, so the basic rules to building a deck. We'll just kind of go down the general guidelines. Usually you want 16 to 20 backups. That's usually the standard amount that most people play. You want about 18 to 24 forwards, 18 being the lowest, and then the rest is kind of just fill in the blank. If you want to play monsters, they usually take the slot of your summons, but you can kind of play around with the numbers and do what works best for you. Some other rules when you're adding different colors into it is you can go half and half, and that makes it so you can consistently play one color, any color that you want first turn. Now if you don't care so much about half-half, another way that you can do it is maybe 18 to 19 minimum for the other color, and that's kind of like a support element. So like if you're doing like ice fire, you're probably going to do majority ice cards, which do the most damage or do the most for your strategy, and then you have like a couple of fire cards to kind of boost that strength, so like the cards like FAs and things like that. Now if you're trying to play 2 colors but you kind of want to surprise someone with like one certain card, so like in the past there have been a couple of like mono lightning builds that would splash in Shantoto, which is Earth, and that's something that no one will ever expect because they expect you to be playing mono lightning. So if you want to kind of surprise them with a certain card of a different element, you usually want to go to 8 to 10 minimum, and that way if you find that different color, you can always just keep it in your hand, and then you'll be able to play that certain card that you're always trying to play there. But when you build your deck, what you should really be doing, and this is going to separate you from an average player or a casual, is you want to build your deck around a win condition. And that win condition should win against most of the other decks in the meta. So an example of that will be this deck here, which is technically 3 colors, but for the most part, it's just really 2. This is the build that won the Kansas Crystal Cup that I attended. It was played by Sam. Sam's on Prime, so shout outs to him and the Choke Bro channel. They're doing a fantastic job. But if you look at this list here, basically the win condition is going to be Dataluma and Cactuar. So this entire deck is built around that strategy. If you can see, there are cards like Y'shtola, which is going to keep your Dataluma alive from any kind of summons or auto abilities that would kill it. So it's kind of playing the defender. You have cards like Layak, which add to the strategy of Dataluma Cactuar. So that way, if you already use its ability to ping and kill something, you can just go ahead and they swing, and then everything comes back, and now they'll never be able to get past you because you're just going to do it again. You also have cards like Miner here, which kind of add to that strategy. It basically gives you back your backups when you play it, so that way you can search more, and that means more Datalumas, more Cactuars, whatever else that you need to get, basically. And it lets you recycle your monsters too, so if they end up killing Dataluma, you just bring it right back. And the same thing with the Y'shtola. If they try to do something to kill your Dataluma, you bring back the Y'shtola with the Miner, and you kind of just recycle it that way. So if you can, just take a look at this list here. It is from a previous format, but the idea behind it is what we're looking for. This is one win strategy that you can do, and this is a top tier deck, and it still is. And it kind of just revolves around that strategy. So when you're building your decks, try to think of like what you need to do to win, and then you add cards to help you do that. And that's pretty much how you get a competitive deck. Another example would be this one here, and this is a Turbo Ice deck. This is the build that was played by Jordan Denk, I believe. He won Gen Con recently with this deck here. So what's the strategy behind it? Basically what the strategy is you want to make them discard as many cards as possible. Kind of speaks for itself. But at the same time, while you're discarding and they're discarding, you're actually getting cards back. And that's the strategy behind this. So most decks, so if we go back to this list here, if you take a look at it, most cards are 4 or 3. And there's a couple cards that are 5 and 7. So what this Turbo Ice deck is trying to do is trying to make you discard all your cards, so that way each turn you're only starting with 2 cards. So that means you can only play 2 CP cards if you haven't set up already. So at that point, a deck like this here, if you're in that situation, you only have a handful of cards that you can actually play in a given turn. So like if you haven't set up at all and they make you do this and you decide to play forward and died somehow, at that point you're forced to play backups. And if you take a look at this build, there's a lot of 2-drops here, a lot of 1-drops. They're going to be hitting you each turn, and this is a pretty aggressive deck, so you'll probably die before you actually get this set up, and this is what this deck is trying to do. So if you also take a look at this list, while the opponent is struggling to play cards, you're able to play a card every turn. Most of your cards are 2, most of your cards are 1, so if you draw your first 2 cards, you can always play at least one of those cards. And then while your opponent is struggling to, get everything set up, you're just playing more stuff and you're just hitting them for free, basically. So that's the strength of this deck here. And with the Jesper, both players discard 1 card. But at the same time, you're able to get around that with this build here, which is why it won, by playing like the Deep Crown Soldiers. So if you play it and then you add to the stack with Jesper, make both players discard a card, but that happens first, and then the search happens, so you end up keeping that card after. So that's how you kind of build up advantage. And then all the 3-drops here and the 4-drops, you're able to play them next turn too, because if you think about it, both of you have no cards, right? You play you start with 2 cards, they have like 1 card, something like that. You play the Soldier, you have no cards in your hand now, but now you're going to search and add 1 to your hand, and then you do the Jesper first. Both of you discard now that he has 0, you have 0, but now you get your card back from the search. And then when you start your next turn, that's extra 2 cards. So if you think about it, 2 plus 2, 4. You got one card still in your hand. You can play any 4-drop, you can play any 3-drop, and if you have a backup, you can also play any 5-drop. So that's how this deck works, and that's the strategy behind it. And then we have another deck here. This was played by Christopher Matinsky. I'm probably saying the name wrong. Sorry about that. But this also did pretty well in Australia too. And the strategy behind this deck is you're drawing just a shit ton of cards, and then you basically play these really expensive cards that you normally would not be able to play with a regular deck, like the Genesis Avatar, the Nidhogg, which is a 9 cost. So if you think about it, if you got like one backup, you have to pitch 4 cards, including 4 cards and then the 1 card that you're actually trying to play, so that's like 5 cards in your hand. That's your entire hand there, so it's really expensive. But with this deck, you get around it. You're just drawing tons and tons of cards each time, so it's not common. It is common to start with like 9 cards at the start of your turn or something like that, so you can pretty much play for free, and then you play like Renoa to blink it back and do the effect again, so you can just punish them for doing a bunch of stuff. And with Genesis Avatar, you can basically wipe their entire board in 1 turn, and that's what this deck is trying to do. And so if you take a look at these lists here, you can kind of go back in the video, or you can also find this on FFDecks, as you can see where I pulled these lists from, and kind of see the strategy behind these builds. So when you're building your own deck, you want to make sure that you have cards that synergize with each other. So if you pick 2 colors or something like that, you want to make sure that those cards mesh. Rather than picking cards that are good, you want to pick cards that actually work off each other, which is something that I see a lot of new players make mistakes at when they build decks. So an example of this would be like if you wanted to play a combination of earth and water. It is a good deck combination, and there's tons of decks out there that can play those colors well, like the Carbuncle deck, which is basically you play Carbuncle for free and you boost all your little weak cards to 9,000, basically get around that and you're able to grind out games in the late game. But let's say you want to play Water Earth and you say, okay, Dataluma, great card. Curtis just talked about that card for the past 10 minutes, how it's a really good combination. So I'm going to take this card and I'm going to play it in my water build. Oh hey, Minwu, great card. I can't take damage, my forwards don't die. Yeah, I'm going to play it. Now, those 2 cards together are great, but together they're bad because they don't synergize. So if you think about it, Dataluma, as you can read here on the slide, if it takes damage, you deal them 4,000. And if you target it, you also deal something 4,000, which is good. But if you put it with a card like Minwu, which says you can't take damage, you're not going to be able to use Dataluma's effect at all. Right? So if you can kind of just put those 2 things together, you can kind of understand where I'm coming from here. So when you're kind of theorizing about like what card to keep then, because obviously these 2 cards don't work together, so you kind of have to decide what route you want to go towards. And this kind of comes down to knowing what the cards do. So if you want to go with Dataluma, you probably don't want to put them in any kind of water deck at all, just because you're not going to get the same added benefits, because if they target it, you can deal something 4,000, but water doesn't have any card that can actually deal your own card damage, so you're never going to be able to use it to the maximum potential. So if that's the case, you probably want to go the Minwu route, which you can definitely pair with Earth. So if you have a card like Cecil, let's say, it's a 5-drop, says your cards cannot take damage from abilities. If you want to put Earth in it, you probably want to put a card like this, Raban, however you want to say it. Basically, when it enters the board, you pick another card that they control, and you pick Raban himself, and you deal it 9,000. But if you pair it with a card like Cecil, where you can't take the damage, obviously you get to keep this card for free, and you get to kill something for free, which is a good combination that synergizes as well, so you want to probably keep that, and that's probably what you want to go with when you're trying to put those 2 colors together. And the best way to kind of figure out how your cards synergize is to do what I call building a web. So like if you have your actual cards and you spread them out on the table, kind of see what cards interact with each other and put them next to each other. And then any cards that have its own kind of strategy, you kind of put it close by, but you don't put it next to that card. So that way you kind of see how everything maps out. Now, Obviously, you can't make sure all 50 cards are based around the same strategy, just because that's not realistic. But you also want to put cards that synergize with it, and also that bring something that we call multiple lines of play into a deck. And basically what that means is you don't have to do that win condition all the time. You can actually branch into something else. And then from there you can also win the game that way if you have to like adjust towards a certain matchup. Now when you're doing that for different lines of play, if you're thinking about like let's go back to the example of Minwu and Dataluma. Hey, if Minwu doesn't work, I'll have Dataluma. That's not really what we're trying to go for here, just because you want multiple lines of play in the deck that add to your strategy but don't sacrifice the main strategy. Otherwise, you're basically fighting against yourself at that point. So when you're trying to build your deck, obviously if you're trying to play competitively, you have to think about the meta. But I would not recommend that you try to build against the meta in like a major tournament if you're just trying to play at your local scene. If down the line, let's say people try to build against the Final Fantasy II deck, the 5-color Final Fantasy II deck that got second at that event. At that point, you probably don't want to tech against that deck, because if you're playing in locals and no one plays that deck, you're just wasting cards. So when you play your local event, kind of see what other people are playing, and then from there decide what you want to play or what cards you want to put in to counter whatever they're playing there. Now, if you're going to like a local qualifier tournament, which is definitely going on now, at that point you probably want to start teching against those major decks that have been winning those big things, just because people are probably going to be playing those decks. And when you're looking at your own deck, don't be subjective about it. You have to take a look at it objectively. There's no place of sentimental value in this game, especially if you want to, or in any card game, if you're trying to play competitively. Although it may be your favorite card, it might not be good enough for the meta. So you kind of have to keep that in mind and, kind of put it on the shelf if you have to. Examine the weaknesses of it. So if you're playing a deck or if you have a certain color combination that you want to play, so let's say you really want to play Fire Wind just because, a certain card in there is your favorite, you want to build a deck around it. If, let's say, that deck loses to Mono Lightning, like almost all the time, do you really want to be playing that deck? Just because a lot of people are going to be playing Mono Lightning, you're going to see that it's a very common deck, or even Ice, let's say if it loses to Ice all the time. There's a lot of people playing Ice right now, and you probably don't want to play it, especially if you're trying to be competitive. So you kind of have to keep that in mind. It kind of sucks, to be honest, but that's kind of how the meta works for any card game. There are always, combination of cards that are better than other ones too, so you just have to keep that in mind. But, if you feel like you have something that's not the meta, and you feel like it's really good, who knows, it might be really good, because usually what the meta really is whatever's more consistent. So if it turns out this new build is more consistent, people will start playing that, and that becomes the meta. So like, Gen Con, second place, Final Fantasy II deck. No one really saw that coming, and that deck's really good. So that's probably the new meta now, and that's something that people will have to keep in mind and play against, or will play themselves. So, not all hope's lost. If you find something that's really good, who knows, might be the new meta. And when you take a look at your deck, you can also tech cards against certain matches. So, let's say you're playing Ice and you're losing a lot to Vikings, just heavy draw, and you can't just keep up. You might want to put a card like the Emperor here, which basically says if they draw a card, you get to pick a forward on their side and dull and freeze it. So you get to punish them for basically drawing cards. So probably a good card to tech against that kind of matchup. And if you're playing any color and you hate Ice, which a lot of people do, a lot of people are teching this card here, which is Shadow Lord. As you can see there, kills all the 2 costs, and if you look back at that Turbo Ice build that we were looking at before, almost every card is a 2-drop or a 1-drop. So if you play this card after they've already, did everything, all of it dies. And if they have something else on the board, you're going to deal with whatever, forward that's there that's still alive, 2k for each thing that just died. So usually you're going to be able to kill something else too. And then, keep in mind that these are tech cards, so if it turns out that you're still losing to those combinations, even after you're putting the cards in, you might want to reevaluate what you're playing, and you might want to go back to the drawing board and either play something else or put in something else to try to make up that matchup. But that's pretty much what it kind of takes to build a deck competitively. Hopefully this helped. And if you have any questions, feel free to message us on the FXBG Turks page on Facebook. We'll go ahead and kind of help you out whatever way we can. The next video after this is going to be like a crash course on the meta. So basically what the goal of that video will be is, if you play against anybody and you see a certain color, you'll know exactly what cards to look out for, what they do, as well as what their strategy is going to try to be. So keep an eye out for that. That's going to come out next week. But that will wrap it up for today. Have a great day, and continue enjoying the game. It's definitely a lot of fun.